The 15th of October, 2008. Vegas. The fireworks over the ambush site echoed in Tut's mind. Those anarchs had driven with all haste to attack their position, to reclaim what they thought was rightfully theirs. Right into that trap that he, Manuela, and Nathaniel had set. On the offensive against a smaller enemy, an enemy that would surely crumble to ash before the night was out. But yet, that gang, that comparative army, had faltered and fallen to so few. The bright lights of the overhead explosives flashed in Tut's eyes, the eyes that had seen this all before. 34 years and 357 days ago. The 22nd of October, 1973. They had been trapped there for hours. The radios were silent, leaving only the desert wind to howl in their ears. They had been given no information, not the grunts. The infantry were just told to point and shoot in the 3rd Egyptian Army. Point and shoot until we reclaim the Sinai Peninsula. Keep fighting until told otherwise. Keep fighting those stateless Israelites. Keep pushing at them until we back ourselves into a corner with no friends to pull us out. Tufik el-Hilal, proud soldier of the 3rd Army, stood with his comrades at the water reservoir, watching the tank's contents pour out into canteens. The massive weight of that water yet nothing compared to the press of their enemy upon them. They were surrounded. The first week of the war had been extraordinary. His countrymen had fought tirelessly across the Suez Canal, seizing countless Israeli strongpoints and exacting the revenge over half a decade in maturity. The cheers his regiment roared by the radio still warmed him against the bitter desert night. The sheer elation of hearing their friends had not died in vain, if at all. That it wasn't them having to do the hero's work. The ceasefire had been called days prior. The Soviets and the Americans fretting over their pawns wearing themselves ragged. No, not the Soviets. They had done nothing for us, despite their so-called alliance with Egypt. Those communists had not aided the Arabs in the conquest of the American foothold in the Middle East. Those selfish bastards had left the grunts to do their dirty work, leaving their enemies to intercede on our behalf. Too little, too late was a common sentiment in the camp. The IAF had broken their master's leash and pushed Egypt hard into the south, trapping Tawfik's army, surrounding them, cutting them off from supplies, from the very water that he had watched pour into the mouths of thirsty killers. It was enough to drive a man insane. The knowledge that at any moment a force of seemingly infinite strength could bear down upon him, not 200 kilometers from his home, his family. That at any moment the source of his strength, his hope, could be left completely defenseless against an unstoppable horde. Dawn broke across the army on the 26th. The air was still, the hundreds of soldiers huffing great lungfuls of dusty air. The tension in the camp could have been cut with a toothpick. Hours passed. Engines revved, guns cocked, men prayed. The ceasefire the UN had declared meant nothing. Israel had broken it and trapped them there. Now it was Egypt's turn to play. The commanders sounded the charge, up and out. The men cried as bullets whizzed past them, through them and into their brothers in arms. Aeroplanes boomed overhead, their payloads whistling down. Tufik turned to Mahmoud and Manon, the men he had known since he was 18. The familiar brown of Mahmoud's face turned and screamed for Tufik to get down, the French Manon charging the big brute as his eyes stayed fixed on the smouldering crater where his brown friend had been. Pain. The tanned Frenchman came into focus, his voice barely intelligible over the ringing in Tufik's ears. Something bit into his palm. His gun. He was clutching it in a death grip. A vice so strong that he doubted he could ever let go. Maybe he wouldn't need to. Maybe he would die here, under fire, away from his family, from Sharifa, his dear elder sister, from Yahya, the little brother that he could not leave. Not yet. Not when there was still so much that he needed to learn. The feeling of fear in his chest grew so large Tufik thought that he would burst, his gory remains mixing with those of Mahmoud's, as they started to drip from heaven. Manon was still screaming in his native tongue. "Get up, you hulking monster! Get up and fight with me!" Tufik nodded, shifted his finger onto the trigger of his rifle, and went to work. Peeking from cover, peering into the onslaught before him. Tanks and the crews pouring from their wrecks, infantry being mowed down all around him. He fired and fought from his corner, turning periodically to check that his friend, the friend that had taught him so much about the world, the friend that had shown him the error of his prejudices, the friend who was now laying on the sand, his own weapon, lying beside him, covered in blood. Suddenly, the baking sun and the dry air seemed to melt away. The cool chill that ran through his body, the anxious, terrified sweat streaming from every pore. These things replaced Tufik's surroundings, and even they had slipped away from his mind, his friend's survival taking up all of his mental capacity. Stop the bleeding. They had taught him how. They said to apply pressure to the wound and bandage it, but he did not have enough hands. So the giant did all that he could. He cradled his friend, the one whose breath now slowly rasped like a knife being sheathed, both sounds seeming to cease abruptly.